Suburbia. Picture the street you probably grew up on, a winding curve that dead ends into a cul-de-sac. Safe, quiet, green lawns stretching forever. It feels like paradise, except it's actually a maze designed to keep you isolated. Look down from a helicopter and you see why. One main road branches into dozens of dead ends, like veins that go nowhere. They call it a dendritic pattern, which is a fancy way of saying disconnected by design. Your neighbor's house sits 50 feet away, but to actually visit them by car, you're driving a full mile around the block. For kids on bikes, it's a prison. For parents, it's an endless taxi service. In fact, the average suburbanite now spends over 100 minutes a day in a car, more than a full work shift just commuting and chauffeuring. The whole point was for maximum privacy, they said. What they didn't mention, people in these subdivisions have 25% fewer conversations with their neighbors. We bought isolation and called it the American dream. But the real cost isn't what you pay the bank, it's what everyone else pays. American municipalities spend over $40 billion annually just maintaining excess suburban infrastructure that will never generate enough tax revenue to pay for itself. In Australia, the infrastructure alone, pipes, power lines, garbage collection, costs 4 times more per house than a dense city block. These neighborhoods are financial time bombs, and the later you move in, the worse the explosion hits you. Then there's the car situation. 2, sometimes 3 vehicles per family just to function. Fire trucks struggle with the geometry, so emergency response times balloon when someone's having a heart attack. We literally built a landscape that needs more concrete, more utilities, and more debt per person than any human settlement in history. It's a Ponzi scheme written in asphalt, and someone's always paying the bill. The Ring Road. A driver in London wastes 156 hours a year sitting in traffic. That's a full month of 8-hour workdays just staring at bumpers. Multiply that across every ring road city on Earth, and you're talking about trillions in economic waste. The massive concrete loop they built to solve this problem is the reason nothing got better. In fact, it got worse. Back in the 1960s, planners thought they'd cracked the code, build a giant circle around the city, shunt the cars off to the highway, problem solved. Clean downtown. Happy commuters. Except they forgot one tiny detail, the fundamental law of traffic. Build more road, and you get more cars. It's called induced demand, and it's the original sin of urban planning. It's not theoretical. When the M25 ring road around London was expanded in the 1990s, induced demand filled the new lanes within 3 years. The same pattern repeated in Tokyo, Paris, and São Paulo. Every new highway filled up, the old streets stayed clogged, and suddenly you had traffic everywhere instead of just downtown. It's not a solution, it's feeding the disease. Look at the scale of these bets. Boston's Big Dig cost $24 billion just to bury one highway. The project was supposed to take 8 years. It took 17. Environmental contamination delayed construction another 3 years. And the traffic? Barely improved. Today, Boston drivers still lose roughly 47 hours a year to congestion, nearly identical to pre-dig levels. For $24 billion, they could have funded the entire Northeast Corridor rail network twice over. But traffic physics doesn't care how much money you throw at it. Here's the kicker. Cities that actually demolish their urban highways, the ones brave enough to tear down the concrete, the predicted gridlock nightmare almost never happened. Traffic just evaporated. People changed their habits. Turns out you could have built entire metro systems for what one ring road costs. And these concrete walls? They don't just move traffic around, they split neighborhoods in half, creating permanent barriers of noise and pollution between the city and what's outside it. German data shows suburban car trips have jumped 20% in cities with major ring roads over the last decade. The bypass didn't free anything. It put the city under siege from its own suburbs. The grid. On paper, it's perfect. Straight lines, right angles, perfect squares, no hierarchy, no confusion. Pure reason stamped onto the landscape. When you're walking it, it feels like genius. Then cars arrived, and that beautiful geometry became a machine for generating chaos. Los Angeles is the textbook case. Mile after mile of identical intersections, no landmarks, nowhere to orient yourself. Psychologists call this cognitive overload. When environments are too uniform and repetitive, your brain struggles to encode memory landmarks. LA's grid is so monotonous that people frequently get lost within 2 miles of their own home. Navigation anxiety is real, measurable, and baked into the street design. But it gets worse. To make traffic flow smoothly, engineers widen lanes and rounded corners to let cars speed between lights. Those are interstate design principles, not city streets where kids cross. Every intersection becomes a gamble, a place where the grid's cold logic ignores basic human survival. Manila's a perfect example. Endless grids, 63% congestion. Your 30-minute commute is almost an hour every single day. The grid's main virtue, it's simple, is also its fatal flaw. Long straight avenues become highways, begging drivers to accelerate. Thousands of four-way intersections become a mathematical certainty for crashes and chaos. And there's another problem you don't think about. In sprawling American Sun Belt grids, endless dark asphalt creates urban heat islands that make the city 50 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit hotter at night. Phoenix's average nighttime temperature is 18 degrees Fahrenheit higher in grid-heavy downtown areas than in vegetation-rich surrounding regions. This heat directly increases energy consumption by 5 to 10% across the city, costs approximately $600 million annually in excess cooling, and sends elderly residents to hospitals during heat waves at rates 300% higher than in other US cities. The grid doesn't just look cold, it literally kills. The commercial strip. Over 7,500 people were killed walking in the United States last year. Most of them died here, on this stretch of pavement. The commercial strip isn't a street, it's a crime scene. A linear parking lot interrupted by fast food joints. It's the most financially unproductive and physically dangerous thing we've ever built. It was supposed to serve cars, but it does it so badly it creates its own congestion. Every single business has its own curb cut, its own entrance and exit. The average commercial strip has one curb cut per 150 feet of road frontage. That's dozens of conflict points where vehicles are turning, pedestrians are crossing, and nobody's got clear priority. Insurance data shows commercial strips have nearly triple the accident rate of traditional main streets per mile of road. The edge of the road becomes a gauntlet of unpredictable stops and turns. You get this chaos that's somehow both a high-speed road and a low-speed parking lot, a design that fails at everything. But here's the part that should make you angry. A classic, dense main street generates over 10 times the property tax revenue per acre as one of these strips. Not twice, 10 times. These strips are disposable by design. Cheap buildings on cheap land, built to last 20 years, not a century. When they fail, they leave behind a dead box and a cratered parking lot that costs the city more to maintain than it ever generated in taxes. A single downtown block can house dozens of businesses and employ hundreds. A commercial strip the same size might have 3 businesses and barely any jobs. It's a pattern that actively destroys wealth, replacing it with low-wage, high-subsidy economics. We're subsidizing our own ugly, desolate, dangerous landscapes. They don't even pay for themselves. It's a monument to corporate convenience and public failure. Some planners looked at this mess and thought the only solution was to get rid of the street entirely. That's when things got truly utopian and truly tragic. The Superblock. They had a vision. Tear down the cramped, filthy streets, free humanity. Build gleaming towers and parks, families in the sky surrounded by green space. It was the great modernist dream of the 20th century. Then they built it, and everything fell apart. From British housing estates to French banlieues, the result was identical: total isolation. Instead of vibrant parks, they created empty, windswept voids nobody wanted to use. British researchers found these green spaces were used 60% less than regular parks. They felt dangerous because they were empty, anonymous, unwatched. The eyes on the street that make you feel safe were now 15 stories up, invisible. Jane Jacobs called this the eyes on the street principle. Safety emerges when normal human activity creates natural surveillance. Superblocks inverted this. They concentrated residents in towers, creating blind spaces below. Crime rates in superblock housing proved it. Muggings, break-ins, and assault were consistently 2 to 3 times higher than in streets with active street-level commerce. It was pure single-use zoning taken to its extreme. Living separated from shopping, working, playing. The result wasn't efficiency, it was sterility. Pruitt-Ego in St. Louis became the global symbol of this failure. So unlivable, they demolished it less than 20 years after it opened. The buildings themselves were hostile. Confusing entries, dark hallways, nowhere to claim as your own. It was a paternalistic vision from architects who'd never actually have to live there. The irony is brutal. They thought the street was the problem. The street was the solution. It's where everything happens: shops, chance meetings, life. Now France is spending 12 billion euros undoing this mistake, often by tearing down the towers and rebuilding the streets they destroyed. They built homes. They just forgot to build neighborhoods. The towers are still standing, monuments to a dream that died the day it opened. One-way street. Here's how to destroy a neighborhood in an afternoon. Hang a few one-way signs. For decades, traffic engineers saw downtown as a math problem. How do we move more cars faster? Answer: make one street go north, the other south. Traffic moved beautifully, and the life drained out. You transformed a destination into a bypass. A place to linger became a corridor for commuters rushing through. Nobody browses shops or sips coffee while 2 lanes of traffic blast past at 40 miles per hour. Louisville, Kentucky tested this. They flipped 2 main one-way streets back to 2-way traffic. Local retail sales jumped 30%. The change wasn't just about traffic volume, it was about predictability. On 2-way streets, shoppers could cross easily from both directions, park closer, and navigate on foot. The slowdown meant people actually noticed storefronts. Foot traffic increased 45%. Parking turnover improved, letting more customers visit more frequently. It's not magic, it's basic human behavior. The noise alone on those one-way corridors is brutal, decibel levels high enough to wreck sleep and spike stress. Apartments on those streets become undesirable. For a business owner, your potential customers are literally cut in half. Only traffic from one direction ever sees your storefront. Property values tell the real story. 2-way streets consistently outpace one-way streets in both stability and price. Traffic engineers accidentally devalued the most expensive real estate in the city, all while solving nothing. We sacrificed local economies for a few saved minutes on someone else's commute, and we made our streets more dangerous in the process. We sold our downtown soul for convenience. Quite a deal. The historic core. It's undeniable. Winding medieval streets in a European capital. For 50,000 tourists snapping selfies, it's paradise. For the 5 remaining residents trying to get a couch delivered, it's hell. The city has become a museum piece, gorgeous to visit, impossible to actually live in. Those organic, meandering streets are a beautiful accident of history. They're also fundamentally incompatible with modern life. Forget same-day delivery. Try getting an ambulance in. Emergency response times in these protected cores run 40% slower than in boring, functional grids. That's not quaint. That's a fatal design flaw. Locals aren't forced out by bulldozers anymore. They're forced out by logistics. Venice is the extreme case. There are now officially more beds for tourists than for actual Venetians. They're becoming extinct in their own city. Venice's population has dropped from 175,000 in 1951 to 48,000 today. At current rates, the city will be completely devoid of permanent residents within 20 years. It won't be a museum then. It'll be a theme park built on top of empty apartments. This is urban consumption at its final stage. The local economy gets completely warped. A bakery that fed residents for a century gets replaced by a souvenir shop because tourists spend more. Rental apartments convert en masse into Airbnbs. hollowing out the actual population and pushing prices into the stratosphere for anyone left. Barcelona's made it a political war zone. Its city council has begun imposing caps on short-term rental licenses and demolishing illegal Airbnb operations after residents staged protests and occupied city streets. The historic core becomes pure extraction, mining its own beauty for cash until there's nothing left but a beautiful shell. You've preserved a city for people who don't live there. Is that the win you wanted? The city's heart stayed perfectly preserved, but it stopped beating. What happens when you try to build this kind of perfection on purpose? Pedestrian Street. It was the progressive move of the 1970s. Cars are the enemy, so ban them. Tear up Main Street, throw in some benches and fountains, build a shopping paradise. A few very dense cities pulled it off. Hundreds of smaller towns. They built paradise and watched it empty. The diagnosis was right. The treatment was wrong. In a city built around cars, you can't just amputate the street and expect it to survive. They created a walkable island surrounded by car-dependent sprawl, cutting businesses off from their customers. A great pedestrian space needs one thing above all: people, and you can't import them for a few hours a day. These projects failed because they were shopping districts, nothing else. Dead after 5 p.m. Without residents actually living nearby, there's no evening crowd, no built-in audience. Empty feels empty because it is empty. One pedestrian street in Minneapolis remained completely empty for 6 months, despite mild weather and safety. When they moved a coffee cart there and hired a street performer, traffic tripled within 2 weeks. Emptiness is self-reinforcing. So the pedestrian zones work in Europe? Yeah, they work because they're woven into dense neighborhoods with homes, offices, culture nearby. They're the living room of the community, not just the shopping mall. The American version built a beautiful stage with no actors, and it showed. The data's brutal. Over 75% of these American projects eventually failed so badly they reopened to cars. Germany ran a comparison between two towns. One pedestrianized its center and watched 40% of its shops close. The other slowed traffic, added bike lanes, and kept its downtown almost entirely alive. They learned the lesson. A great street isn't about removing cars. It's about creating something so good you don't need them to enjoy it. The world's full of broken systems. We've got the evidence for every single one. Keep watching.